technological. They're LED.
Madam Mayor, it's 6 o'clock.
That's the fish.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this Thursday, August 22nd, City Commission Budget Work Session number 4 to order and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mayor Pam Triolo.
Here.
Vice Mayor Andy Amoroso.
Here.
Commissioner Scott Maxwell.
Here.
Commissioner Omari Hardy is absent for the roll. Commissioner Herman Robinson.
Here.
If everyone would please rise for the pledge, led by Commissioner Robinson.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, moving on with our budget work sessions. Of course, our Stantec presentations, and to intro that would be our illustrious city manager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Commissioners. Welcome again to another workshop on your budget. Tonight we're going to be covering all the various funds. I was going to actually get nostalgic and introduce them as the Burton and Associates crew, but but it is our Stantec crew. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get into their presentations. Again, this is a active live spreadsheet that really gives you your cash in, cash out, cash balance, and those are really relevant things that you need to know when you talk about your different funds. So with that, we'll go ahead and start the process.
Thank you, Mike. Madam Mayor and Commissioners, it's a pleasure to be here. Is this on? I guess it is.
Yeah.
Letitia's going to kind of lead our presentation tonight, but we're going to go back. You've seen most everything we're going to show you tonight, but there's been a few changes staff has made. Nothing of material impact, but we want to get you reminded of the different funds, and I think in preparation for staff to finalize their budget. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to her and we'll start going through the funds with you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Letitia.
Good evening. I'm Leticia Duholic, and I don't have a formal presentation, but I do have every single one of those 7 funds. And so what we've done since the last time we met is to basically reload these models with the new proposed 2020, so with a firmed up 2020 budget. And so that's kind of what we wanted to show you. There was some changes to the general fund that you first looked at. And so we wanted to start with that one. So you've seen these panels quite a few times. For the folks that maybe haven't seen this before, we've got the revenues and expense chart on the top right, and the cash out is your orange line, your cash in is your black line. And typically you want to have the cash in right on top of that cash out so that you're maintaining your fund balances. And if the cash out is actually higher than your cash in, then you're using your working capital balances. And if in the event that your cash in is higher than your cash out, then you're building working capital balances. So this includes a just about 1.2 million reduction to what we had originally discussed with you or shown you before. But starting in 2021, well, I guess the 2020 budget includes a reduction of $300,000 to the transfers from the electric fund. And then the 300 that Jacob is pointing to right here includes further reductions through 2024.
Yeah, I can comment on that if you want me to, Letitia, because you seem to vapor lock there. If you'll recall the conversations about looking at the general fund's relationship and interrelationship to the electric utility and the need to ratchet down the dependency that has occurred for many years, so much so that about 12% of the revenues from the electric utility have been transferred over, and those retained earnings really need to be left in the electric fund so that they can start to look at bonding out that money and add that to the profitability that Ed has led his team to realize in the electric fund, but we still need to do more. So therefore, in this proposal, you're looking at a $300,000 a year reduction in that transfer over from the electric fund to the general fund. And that means correspondingly, we're going to have to cut back expenses or find revenues in the general fund just to keep afloat. And we're committed to doing that because we're going to go from a $4.8 million transfer down to a 2.4 is the goal. And again, when you get further out on these projections, the numbers look daunting, and they always do on any projection. So don't be afraid of that. The key thing to remember is, as this budget is approved, it's locking in that commitment to wean the general fund, which is something we've talked about for a long time, and to make in this year the electric fund more healthy, and also to drop some money into fund balance, because that's an issue for us as well in the general fund. Is that good? Thank you.
Well, I guess what I was, so what Mike was essentially telling you is that going forward, we would also reduce some of our costs. And so we could play that out to see the fund, the working capital balances, and they go out a little bit longer. So. Oh, it does. Yeah. So this includes the reductions. This, I guess, is similar reductions from the transfers. And I apologize. I didn't realize that was already there. So this includes the reductions at the same level. If you took it out, you can see the difference. So if he takes the reductions to the expenses out, then you only have the transfers from the general fund being reduced, and so that working capital balance moves, or I guess gets negative a little bit faster, because you were carrying that balance out to 2027 with that equivalent 300,000 reduction for the next 5 years or 4 years.
Mr. Hardy?
I'm sorry, yes, could you explain again the relationship between the $300,000 serial reductions, or serial, I guess, give backs to the electric fund,
So-
and the working capital balance?
Yeah, there's a $300,000 reduction in the transfer coming into the general fund
Okay,
from the electric fund, and that happens for 5 years.
right.
And 300 this year, another 300, so that's 600,000.
600, 900.
900, okay.
Okay.
And that shows that without a corresponding reduction in cost to the general fund. And if you can save that,
Say that again. That shows that.
this shows the result if you just reduce the revenues that are coming into the general fund
Without a
and don't cut
corresponding
the
reduction.
cost correspondingly.
Okay.
Now, I want him to now bring the cutting of the cost of for each of those years to the same amount that you're reducing the revenue that's coming in, and you'll see that the general fund, that the working capital balances. Wait a minute. Let's see. What are you doing?
So,
Okay. Let me just get this straight here. Okay. So the green bars there represent just reducing the revenue coming in. Okay. So your working capital balances dip more quickly. If you also cut the cost corresponding in each year, then the working balances don't reduce as quickly, but they still reduce in those out years.
so those 0.3 don't represent the givebacks from the general fund to the electric fund. It represents the reduction in costs that we're compensating for that.
In the general fund.
Okay,
The
all
reduction
right.
of costs in the general
Thank you.
fund.
I was wondering why, when that went down,
It's a little confusing.
the working capital balance got, the decline got steeper, but I see what you're saying.
All right. Commissioner Robinson?
I had a question about the taxable value increase. It's 11, we did good this year. What was the number of units we came online with? It was 200?
It wasn't a substantial amount. I don't know if Mark has a number on units. No, I apologize. I can get that information for you.
So we're counting on increasing by 200 at least every year, and yet the taxable value is going down. Is that, I'm reading that wrong?
That's an increase in overall taxable value, which includes new construction. It's just the property appraiser saying the value is getting greater
Overall,
so there's two
all
components.
taxable categories.
Even if you had no growth in units, that number would be, there would be an increase. It wouldn't be as high as if you have growth. So the rate of increase is not as great in the out years, because we don't anticipate that you will be able to maintain that trend. But that's a projection, and it's up. I mean, if you believe that you're going to have higher increases because of either growth or the stroke of the property that appraisers pin on what the values are, then we can change those numbers. But that's what we believe is a conservative assumption.
It's a
about-
conservative assumption. I think that's the key point.
Yeah, yeah.
That's assuming not a lot of growth.
But we're budgeting electrically for growth.
Oh, you're asking on the electric fund what the number of new accounts would be?
Yeah.
We can get to that when we get to the electric
Okay,
utility. Yeah.
I guess they started a little
Commissioner Hardy?
prematurely.
Just, so when we met a month ago or 2 months ago, we were talking about, there was this discussion about a one-time $1 million cut and going on from there. And then we had an electric meeting update when we added to that, I guess, the serial reductions and givebacks to the electric, utility, the 300,000, 600,000, 900,000, 1.2 million, et cetera. Is that reflected here, or have we taken a different course?
No, it should be reflected in here. There was about a $1.2 million reduction to your starting budget as compared to the first time you looked at this.
Okay, so this,
That's independent, that's a different thing, that's there, and then you got the 300 reduction coming also, which would cost an additional 300 each year cost reduction.
so we're basically starting at a $1.3 million reduction.
Yes. So, well,
At the end of the day, you have another 5 years of another 15 million on top of it. Is that right, Bruce?
yeah.
Okay. So, okay. So, and I guess because we don't see total amounts here, what we basically see are rates, and rates have changed. As far as the total amount of the general fund from one year to the next, from last year or this current fiscal year to next fiscal year, what are we seeing? Are we seeing basically a reduction in what we thought was the growth going to be, or are we seeing a straight?
Well, so actually last year when we looked at this, your property values came in higher than we were projecting. So you have some growth on your property values, which is your ad valorem revenues.
Okay.
But going forward, as you can see in that line that Jacob is showing, we're assuming 8% in 21, 22, and then 7 and 7, and kind of scaling that growth down. So to what Mike just referred to, the conservatism is if growth comes in higher than these, then you would have a bump, an increase to overall revenues, which would, assuming the expenses are exactly the same, would give you additional funds.
I'm trying to figure out the $1 million difference.
Cost reduction.
Yes.
There's a 1,000,002 cost reduction from this year to the budget year, okay?
Okay.
And then when the 300,000, another 300,000 to offset the $300,000 reduction in revenue from the electric fund. So in the budget year, you have 1.5 million, I believe.
Well,
1.2 in the budget.
Okay.
This budget year, you've got 1.2 million. Next year, you reduce the.
Wait a minute, what's next year? Budget year is 2020, right?
Right, so it's 20.
In 2020, it's only 1.2. And then starting in 2021,
fine.
Yeah.
there's another 300,000 for the next. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm trying to figure out is, last year when we had this conversation, we were not looking at a
We
$2
can,
million reduction.
Madam Mayor, can we clarify that?
Please do so.
Yes, thank you. Bruce Miller, Finance Director, for the record. Is this one?
Yes.
Okay. To clarify the discussion on the $1 million, it wasn't over last year. The $1 million was the first proposal that we put on the floor that you reviewed.
Okay.
And we were about $1 million, 1,000,001 short.
Okay.
And that was a level service budget from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20, not doing any changes significantly. So that would put us into about 1,000,001 deficit. So then we made changes to the overall budget to break even without, and I'd like to add, without using fund balance this year.
Okay.
This year, we are not using fund balance. It's our revenues match our expenditures. Plus, we are reducing the amount of the transfer from the electric fund by $300,000. So in order to do all that, that was the 1,000,001 and then the $300,000 on top of that. So But that was from the proposed budget,
Yeah.
not the fiscal year 19.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, that when the departments put their budgets together and we get to that point and the budget process, that was what they see as they would like to have in the. And the other thing I think is important to understand, maybe it'll help a little bit, Commissioner Hardy, is that these budget years are absorbing, obviously, the increase in the taxable valuation on the revenue side is coming in, but there are other costs going up in the general fund. The sheriff's budget goes up, our health insurance benefits and those kinds of things. The union contracts are factoring in at those percentages, and all that's going back and forth. And on top of that, we're doing this $300,000 maneuver. So there's a lot of give and take back and forth, but I didn't want you to think this is $1 million from last year's
Right.
budget.
So,
So yeah.
so I guess my question would be, I get that this is not, I guess, a level services budget. Like the original budget that was proposed, we're not able to do that. And the difference is about $1.2 million.
Right.
Okay. And that original budget was a level services budget.
Well, I would not say that we're decreasing the level of services. It's not the intent
Okay.
of the budget.
I'm just trying to, when we had this conversation last year, it didn't look like we were going to have to do something like this. And so I'm trying to figure out what accounts for the difference in our expectations from last year.
Well, it's a good question, but I would say anytime you use fund balance to balance your budget, you have a structural deficit.
Yeah.
Okay, so in order to mitigate that structural deficit, we had to take action this year, and that was the $1 million, one number if you're, round numbers. And then on top of that, there's $300,000. But, I don't know exactly what was said or that wasn't said last year per se. But the reality is anytime you have that fund balance, use of fund balance in your budget, you're using your savings account to balance your operating funds.
Sure.
So that's the issue that we're wrestling with this year.
Okay.
All right, good.
Correcting past things too in many ways. We talked about not using fund balance anymore to try to balance the budget every year, which some finance directors have suggested doing, or we had to do in certain circumstances, or whatever it may be. Getting ourselves to be more conservative to do that, and also to wean ourselves off those contributions, electric utility as well.
I'm going to go up to the next level, if you will. One of the reasons why this is so important for fiscal year 20 is, as you know, we're working with our financial advisors to go out to bond. And in order for us to be successful in that endeavor, we have to be able to show the bondholders that we are able to repay debt service, correct? So,
These are revenue bonds,
Correct.
not,
Right.
right,
Yeah.
just for clarification.
They're not general obligation.
but yeah,
Correct.
Public understanding.
So in order to do that, we have to stop using fund balances. We have to stop pulling in the different transfers from the enterprise funds. Because in order for the enterprise funds to pay back the debt service, it needs to go to the debt service and not to prop up the general fund. There's also debt coverage ratios that we have to maintain. So we have to have more money going into fund balance in addition to breaking even. So, there's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3%. Determining upon the bond covenants of extra funds that we have to put into the different covenants in order to pay or be able to pay. So because we're taking these actions, i.e. the bond initiative, it's really forcing some fiscal discipline internally to achieve that.
And then, so I guess where is this budget for the upcoming fiscal year relative to the budget of the fiscal year we're in right now?
Where's fiscal year 19?
Yeah, in terms of like the absolute amount of dollars we had budgeted for this fiscal year we're in right now compared to the
Can you pull,
dollars of, that we had budgeted.
Letitia can pull that up.
Yeah, so the 19 budget that we have is about 35.7 million. And then this budget is 36.7.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
We can move on. Thank you.
So then the next fund that we brought for you is the electric fund. And this one has really not changed much since we last chatted about this. And so we're essentially at the same place.
It does include the reduction of the transfer to the general fund of 300,000 for the next 5 years.
So how does that change?
I don't know, if we took that out, why don't you take that out and then let's go back and so we can show you what it did to it. That's a good question. It should make it look a little more positive than it looks now, in the sense that your working capital fund balances would be a little bit higher for a little bit longer. Huh? It's the opposite? No, but I know, when he takes it out, the balances will be higher, I think. But when he removes that reduction is what I'm asking him to do. Take it back to how it was before, okay? Now, the green bars do not have the $300,000 reduction in the transfer, correct? So this is kind of how you saw it before, okay? And when you have the $300,000 reduction in the transfer, it goes to the blue bars. Now, if we extended those blue bars out and let them go negative, it would get more and more negative in the out years, but you can't really have a negative fund balance, so that's why we don't show that. But this fund does have some challenges that are, when you go out for the bonds, for sure, are going to have to be met, and either in terms of cost reductions, creative financing, structures that your FSAs might bring to the table, and potentially some level of adjustments in your rates as you go forward to support the bond issue. So,
Okay, so let's look at it the other way again, or
Yeah, you want,
sir, ma'am?
did you want to put it back in the way you had it?
Yeah, let's take it back to the way you had it.
Madam Mayor, so Michael, in this, do you have the debt service graphs and, or?
The debt service coverage? Is that what you mean, Mike?
Yeah,
With the SHRIP program, basically, is that factored in?
Yes,
Is that?
if I may.
Please.
If you see, my eyes aren't that good, but
There we go.
in fiscal year 20, fiscal year 20, you see that our net revenues are about 21, okay, on this projection here. What that includes is debt service on anticipated capital projects. If we were to take that out, we're north of $1.5 million, almost to $1.6 million surplus. So in fiscal year 20, again, a major change in that we're not using fund balances to balance the budget, over $1.5 million surplus before debt service. And there's some other initiatives that the electric company is pursuing along with our payments that we think that we can capture another $250,000 in savings. So significant changes in the financial condition of the electric fund just in the short year and a half.
Ed?
For the record, Ed Liberty, Director of the Electric Utility. We also have some additional items in here, a little bit of working room. We have, I believe, 1% growth on residential and 0% growth on commercial. We've also got a little bit of room to absorb some coming rate increases, likely on the, not to our customers, but to us as a utility, because of transmission rates going up on the FPL system. That will affect all customers on the FPL transmission system. So we've got a little bit of room in there for that. We also budgeted on the conservative side on our natural gas fuel costs, which drive 50 to 60% of our wholesale electric bill. We've budgeted natural gas at about $3.10. At the moment, natural gas is down around 225, 230. We're running about 50, 60 cents below that number. So we've got ourselves a little bit of room there in case natural gas prices go up or come down. The good thing is that, you know, to the extent that we save money in natural gas and save money in wholesale power costs, it helps rebuild fund balance. So we've got a little bit of room there to absorb these things.
Hardy?
Are we hedged, and if so, to what extent?
We do not do hedging. I'm not aware that we're allowed to.
Really?
So we don't do any hedging. To the extent that we,
Lock in natural gas prices at what they are.
no, we do not. No, we do not.
Our competitors can.
Our competitors, I believe, can. I'm not an expert on rate making in Florida, to what extent they're allowed to do that and who takes the risk, whether it's the shareholder taking the risk or the ratepayer taking the risk. But hedging is a tool that is used. We do not. Now, to the extent, well, I would use the term kind of I don't know if it's correct to say, but synthetic or pseudo hedging, to the extent that we diversify off of natural gas. So we're hedging that we have a piece that's tied to coal.
Sure.
We have a piece that's tied to nuclear. So nuclear is 40% of our portfolio in terms of total kilowatt hours delivered. So that's hedged, if you will. Now, nuclear looks expensive today, but when natural gas prices were $8, $9, $10 a million BTU, nuclear looked great, right? So we're hedged in that regard. We've got a market basket of fuels. Our hedge going forward will be more solar through the FMPA Municipal Solar Project 1 and Municipal Solar Project 2. So those would be great hedges because we'll be locked in, if you will, on a price that's not subject to where carbon-based fuels go.
And the nuclear
Commissioner
plant is
Robinson?
dead when?
I'm not aware of a retirement date for the nuclear plant. Our debt service rolls off, I want to believe 2026. I have to look to Clyde, who's the brains behind that for me.
So it's not going to shut down before that.
We have no information publicly available that we've seen, nor looking at how the unit operates, nor recognizing FPL is one of the best, if not the best, nuclear operator in the country, to believe that that plant would retire early. It's very well managed, very well run.
Everything wears out.
The only possible retirement would be the Stanton 1 asset. The debt is rolling off, and that unit is mid-'80s vintage. It's coal. It hasn't been announced for retirement. We know that OUC is looking at their integrated resource plan and making a determination as to what the future of that unit would be. They haven't published anything. That determination is probably, I would guess, at least 9 months to a year away from being public, if not longer.
And that's
But-
clean
but-
coal.
It's coal.
Is that redundant?
Okay.
Oxymoron?
Last time we looked at this, can you scroll down to show the capital projects? This has all those capital projects in it. And last time we took those out so we could show you that you came into parity with FP&L. And without the capital projects, just the O&M, you would be okay. And why don't we show you that again real quickly, just as a comparison. You can zero those out pretty quickly. So you can see that just with operations and maintenance expenses, you would bill fund balance. Your revenues are exceeding your expenses, but you know, Ed has told you before last week. He gave I thought a very good explanation of the issues that are going on in your facilities, where you're going to have to be spending these large capital dollars. And I'm sure he could go over it again with you tonight if you wanted him to. But when you bring the capital in, that's when the challenge starts coming. And so why don't you bring that back in for us? And Ed, if you want to go over that again, it may be a good time to kind of summarize what the need for that capital is all about.
So the capital falls into two major areas. One is the addition of a second tie line, and the second is the improvements that we're making to the distribution system. So it's a transmission and distribution driven program. We collectively refer to as SHRIP, the System Hardening and Reliability Improvement Project. So the goal is to take the cash flow that we're generating, the profitability, if you will, and take that and use it to fund the debt service on the capital improvements that we're making in the system, and to continue to monitor that closely and basically layer in the capital and the associated financing at the rate that we can afford, and to try to avoid increasing rates for as long as we possibly can. So every utility, and it's not a static environment, every utility in the state, including Florida Power and Light, is facing mounting costs. So this is not something that's only happening to Lake Worth Beach. This is happening to all utilities, and having to adjust and make capital improvements and fund them. So we're looking at this in a a living, breathing environment. As the commissioner said, this is our kitchen table discussion, what we can afford as a family, and then laying out our plans based on what we can afford. And if we need additional income, then we'll raise additional income. Operate below our budgets. We are healthy on a cash basis. We're generating cash to support the financing. The question will be over time, will we have enough cash to support all the financings that we want to do at the time when we want to do them? So what we may have to do going forward is consider delaying certain projects. That's not on the horizon right now. We've laid out an aggressive plan. But if we need to, delaying capital deployment on some of the improvements could be one way to do it. We could look at future rate increases. That's the last thing we want to do. We're also benefiting from decreasing costs. So that's creating even more cash flow, may create even more than we're anticipating right now in the budget. So this is something that we'll continue to monitor. Certainly, we look at our numbers monthly. We'll be talking with Stantec at least on a quarterly basis going forward, and no less than annually, coming back and reforecasting what we can afford to do. So we'll take bites at the apple as we can afford them and adjust accordingly going forward. All the while being mindful that we want to retain the claim to being at or near parity and remaining in the lowest 25% priced utilities in the state. We want to be in that quartile for our 1,000 kilowatt hour residential customer.
Excellent.
And we had a conference call with your financial advisor the other day, and I believe they're going to be meeting with the city manager and your staff next week, I believe it is. And I guess it's yet to be firmly decided to move forward with this, but I think the idea that they had about what would happen next is that this fall, they would start pulling together the plan of finance, working with us to do a feasibility study for this bond issue, and then do what Ed's talking about, get a better sense of where we can narrow this gap with cost savings and things that Ed was talking about. But they're anticipating wanting to issue bonds near the end of the year, and maybe they won't be able to issue enough to fund that capital program, because like what Ed is saying, sitting around the kitchen table, we can afford so much. So we anticipate that sometime in the fall, if that schedule holds, after you all meet with Davenport, we would be coming back to you with some plan, a joint plan with your financial advisor and our feasibility study for debt funding. And at that point, like Ed said, the last thing we want to do is say you have to have rate increases. But that would be the point where we would kind of have a sense of if we need those and what level they would need to be done at. So I don't think you need to take any action on rate increases this year. If you wanted to, you could, because this fund has some challenge. But I think in the fall, near the end of the fall, is when we'll be getting back to the answers Ed's talking about there.
So just for the record, we have no plans to propose a rate increase at this time. We don't see that, at least for the next year or more. We don't see the need to do that. Obviously, if we feel pressure, we'll be back to you and let you know, and you'll see it in the numbers when I do my quarterly reports to you. But we're generating that cash. We do have a conservative budget here in terms of our costs. We continue to reduce our costs. As I said, natural gas prices are lower than was built into our budget, and we've got a conservative number here as well. So as we generate additional cash flow, that basically rebuilds continues to hold up the fund balance and put us in a better position. But we need to be very judicious about the rate at which we bring on debt service so we don't get, so close to the edge. So it's going to be a very carefully monitored thing. It's not going to be a once a year, look at the dipstick and see where we're at. We do monitor these things closely. For those of you that sit through my painful quarterly reviews on the finances, you see that we're looking at this very, very closely every quarter. And we'll be remodeling, if you will, at least once a quarter so that we can keep a very close track of where we're at. At the moment, we're enjoying growth in line with what we expected, 1% or more, and our costs are lower. For example, total payroll is down today, for the third year in a row. We're lower on total payroll plus overtime. So even though we've given our employees nice raises, we're decreasing our costs there. So we're doing the right things and delivering a better product. Reliability is improving for our customers, and we'll be presenting that. The data is there to show that the reliability is improving. It's not where it needs to be yet, but it's going in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Letitia?
Hi. The next one we'll talk about is stormwater. And this one really hasn't changed since the last time we spoke with you again. And we had talked about this 3.5% rate increase starting in 2020. This one has some projected borrowing coming on too. And so next year, we had suggested that those rate increases be adjusted to the 5% to just maintain the working capital balance. And then to make this fund strong enough from a coverage stance too, to keep up with the capital needs and the future debt needs of this fund.
Commissioner Hardy?
Sure. The capital needs in this fund, Jamie, the project that we had a conversation about on Monday, which of those funds, maybe Brian, you can answer those questions. Which of these funds would benefit from that capital project? Namely the fleet garage. Yeah.
Well, your discussion Monday did not include any discussion of sales tax money being used towards stormwater projects. We look to various grant funding opportunities, Lake Lagoon initiative strategies, those types of things.
Okay.
And the borrowing that was mentioned by Letitia and Mike, a very minor borrowing for this fund. This is a small fund.
Okay. So the trucks, the vehicles that would use that fleet garage or the fleet, I forgot, what the
That's
term is.
public services.
That's public services.
Yeah.
Okay. Which would be what other funds?
Sanitation
Sanitation.
Refuse and
and electric,
general.
general.
Refuse in general. Okay. Thank you.
Feel about
Mr. Robinson?
Just the capacity, if we're doing growth and you don't see any major need for anything in your budget to keep up with the growth.
Not in the stormwater fund, no. It's a very small fund. We have a long-term capital improvement program to enhance the outfalls and minimize king tide flooding. So that's the real focus of this particular fund, as well as the ongoing maintenance of the existing storm drainage system. But again, there's really only 2 people in this department. It's a very small department, very small fund.
When we incentivize, in water, in your overall, when we incentivize, do they consult with you, or is that?
Yes.
How does
Community sustainability, sure. Yeah, we work hand in hand on any
CRA.
opportunities.
CRA
works with us as well, yes.
and so you approve of their incentives?
We don't approve of their incentives. We offer additional incentives on top of what they're doing. Community sustainability is
So
doing an
you're
electric fund.
Okay, you're working together.
Yeah, we all work hand in hand on those.
Recap and remind us why the rate increase is starting in 2020 in this fund?
Fund balance, and Letitia can get more into the details of why it would be 3.5% in 1 year and then 5 for the remaining years.
Yeah, so actually this fund has never had, that I know of, a rate increase since this fee is an annual
It was
assessment.
implemented in 2009 and has never seen a rate increase.
Yep. And so if you look at the working capital fund on the top left, from 19 to 20, because of the capital that's been identified by your staff that's right below that chart, the CIP capital, those larger bars in 20 and 21, that working capital is coming down to that reserve target, and that's what's triggering the necessity for the rate increase of 3.5. And actually, we looked at these 3.5s even last year when we talked about this fund, but the capital has kind of come up a little bit, and so that's why we're saying with the 5% in 2021, what you would do there is basically you could potentially bring those down, but if you did bring those down, that will require additional borrowing. And so if you elevate your revenue, you don't have to borrow as much. And another thing that I think is probably worth pointing out is, again, this is an annual charge. And so, Jacob, if you do I guess I have them here, but the fee would go from, on a monthly basis, from $6.30 to $6.52. So that's like a change of 22 cents. It's very minor.
Thank you.
And also, when this bond issue that we've been talking about is going to be a combined revenue pledge on the bond issue. So this may change a little bit, depending upon how all that combined revenue pledge comes up. You'll need some borrowing. The graph is kind of out of scale there. That's less than $2 million in 2021. The blue one's what I'm pointing at over there. And that would be added to the borrowing, but the rate increase maybe could be less if other funds are going to be contributing, depending upon how it all works out. So I would take that as an indicator that there will need to be something, but whether it'll be exactly that or not, it may be different.
We can always work with legislative asks up in Tallahassee to assist with this particular fund. We've not done that in the past, but we can always put that on the table.
Thank you.
So then the next one, I guess maybe water and sewer, since we've got Brian up there.
Sounds good.
But I would start with the water. Yeah.
He's got 4 of them up here.
So the water fund, again, this one also has really not changed since the last time we met with you all. We were looking at those 3 3/4 annual rate adjustments. And again, scroll down to the CIP. So it does require a little bit of borrowing, and they would come into, I think all this borrowing would happen as part of the combined issuance that the city has been discussing with the FA, financial advisor. And the 3 3/4 essentially keeps your working capital fund right up to that black line throughout the projection.
Scroll down so I can see the funding sources. Okay.
And the total change in the monthly bill too is like $2, like $1.45.
Remind us, is this the fund that the current debt that we borrowed for the original casino is being paid back to?
Yes, and this includes the current payment schedules from the beach fund.
And are we up to 500,000? Where are we now?
I believe, yeah, I think it's 500 and then 50,000 for an interest payment. So it's
500,000 plus 50 for interest.
Yep.
So remind us, was that the original payback schedule that we started with? I know it was a little bit before you, maybe staff. Corinne, do you remember?
It's actually 550 in principal and then additional for interest. And yes, that is the original.
Because we had, stopped paying back the original. So we're back to the original. Great, thank you.
Okay, so then maybe the next one should be the sewer fund. And this one, we had a conversation about this one as well previously, and nothing's really changed in this one either. But we were looking at a little bit higher rate increases in 20 and 21, and this was the one that was coming down, I guess, quite a bit below that working capital target. And then we were trying to get it back up to the working capital target. And if you scroll down to the CIP real quick, this assumes no capital for 20, 21, and 22. And then you start using or paying for capital in 23 and 24. And then what we had done was we increase the amount of capital paid for in 26, just so that you could catch up on some of the capital that you would have otherwise done in 2021 and 22.
And what's that differential equal in dollars and cents?
That one
The 15
is,
and the 15
it's $5.13.
month?
Yeah, on a monthly basis.
If you look at the working capital balances, they are above your target line in those out years, which would indicate that you could either fund more capital or you could maybe not have as quite a big a rate increase. Maybe it'd be 2 instead of 3. That's to be determined depending upon how things turn out, but you probably wouldn't just continue with those rate increases if you projected you were going to build up fund balance. But to Bruce's point, you want to be sure going forward that we can have, you know, a balanced budget without having to use fund balance. So
Those 2 years of increases are shoring us up for the future.
exactly,
basically.
because of, yeah, exactly, right.
So the $5 a month for 2 years shores us up for the
Yeah.
for the projection of the future.
And it
the
could be
small
going
one.
into the future, it might be 1.5% when it all settles out, but
Okay. So it could stay stable after that. Okay. This didn't pull in that. This wasn't the one with the West Palm.
That's what I wanted to ask.
This is local.
Local.
This, Brian, refresh our memory why we were increasing here. Was it mainly to bring it up to today's standards and maintenance? Is this where the pass-through from Palm Beach County
That's
was?
part of it. We have
Okay.
the pass-through from ECR and
You break it down
county,
into pieces.
but also the revenue projections were lower based on a lot of wet years, including this one. So revenues are down. The wetter it is, the less water people use, the less, obviously, then the less sewer bills. So our revenue decreased more than we thought it would. So this kind of makes up for it, you know, with the
But the
rating.
ECR is built into this,
Yes. Yes, this funds the regional system.
and the new plant that
Yes.
they're creating.
Mhm.
Okay.
And just to piggyback on that, the new plant, you know, originally there were costs and then the costs changed. And I know you sit on that board. Are we okay? Right now, we don't see any new
Yes.
additional costs
nothing
coming
major
down?
coming up. All the major capital improvements are either underway or completed, and we become
Yeah, I just wanted
what's
an
called an
update.
R&R utility.
Great.
So that's our fluctuation, our 2-year bump, and
There's
then
been a
we-
spike, yes,
and
and
then
like
boom,
I
we
said,
go
the
back
reduced
down.
revenues.
Thank you.
So then maybe the beach fund?
That's you.
So the beach fund, we've updated the 2020 budget. It's increased a little bit. So this fund is really tiny, and it increased $55,000, but the $55,000 makes a big impact, as you can see in your working capital starting in 26. In 26, you're just, I think you're actually in the negative slightly, but then it comes right back up because it assumes that those payments to the water fund will eventually end. And so they'll have the additional cash flow to essentially recover the balances, because then at that point they're generating a little bit more cash flow than they needed because those payments just go away.
Is that 2026 that drops off?
Yeah, 2026.
Are we paying in 2026 or are we paying in?
You're paying in 2026 as
Okay,
well.
so
So
2027
27
will be the
is,
first year.
yep. And so in that one, I think it's more of a, maybe a possible cost control going forward, and we can show you what the effect of that $55,000 does. But it's maybe put that into the negative expense. So if there was a reduction of $55,000 to this fund, and it carried forward, that working capital balance in 2026 issue would just go away. And then again, it starts coming back up in 27 and 28 because of the debt service payment that comes off.
Yes, could you go into the various components of the fund? I understand there are a few revenue components. We have some leases there. We have some parking revenue there. And then there are various expense components too.
So I guess you could go to the lease tab. So we do have assumed lease payments for the current tenants. And so we go into the detail and we escalate those lease receipts, if you will, by 3.5% every year. It's our understanding from your staff that this is contractual. And so that's generates, if you look at line 11 in 2020, it generates about $350,000. The common area, go to the CAM tab real quick. So you also have some additional revenue from this common area, I guess, I forget what M stands for, but common area management maybe.
Maintenance.
Thank you, maintenance, there it is. $117,000 in 2020. And then you've got other events, and so if you go to the revenue tab, I mean, we can kind of show them in 2020. So you've got the parking revenue, which is the largest source of revenue that you have in 2020. And then you've got other minor parking revenues. You got, scroll down, some facility rentals. I think it's my understanding you have some events in the beach area. What else is in here? The lease payments we talked about, ballroom rental, kitchen rental, ocean terrace rental. So you've got some pretty diversified rentals and revenue sources.
So, fantastic. So things are not terrible there. Fantastic. Okay, could we go back to the lease page? So what we have a $0 amount for is the second floor in leases, right?
It's my understanding that is not leased. That
Right,
section that
because that's the 5,000 square feet? Okay, so
And also ballroom rental.
well, no, the ballroom rental is there. It's on the other page.
Yeah.
But yeah, so were we to lease that, we'd make, do we think about the same amount per square foot on that as we would some of the other restaurants like a Mulligan's or a Mamma Mia's? You know, Mamma Mia's the per square foot rate. I mean, you know, would we make about the same per square foot as we would elsewhere?
I can't. Yeah, I don't
They're not
have
We
that
don't know.
kind of information.
Unfortunately, all the leases at the beach were negotiated separately, and they have different rates. And some have escalators, some don't, based on how the agreements were accepted. So they're not all along. It's not like we're offering, like a normal
Right.
building would be
Right.
X per square foot, and
Right.
everybody has to pay that. It's
I
not
guess, you know, my point is we can, like, the fund isn't terrible, but if we can just lease the 5,000 square feet on the second floor, the fund improves substantially.
So if everything was to play out exactly how we're projecting, if
Right.
you essentially found another $50,000 of revenues, you'd be okay.
But,
I mean,
Madam Mayor, let me,
Please.
that's an easy statement without appreciating, and I don't know if Lauren wants to come up, but I know that there's some deferred expenses and capital investments. The playground equipment that disappeared because it rusted apart. We had to take it down. There's a lot of things that weren't put in there for those kinds of on the expense side. So it's not just a matter of the $55,000 if you wanted to say for the space. And if you did go to lease the space, I understand it's unfinished space, and I don't know what it would bring, you know, once we put it out in the market, and you still have to find space for the staff. So there's some give and take in there. You're going down the right path about looking at revenues, but I don't know.
But this is connected to the conversation we had about Monday about the penny sales tax, right? So basically, whatever we do at the beach with penny sales tax funds should probably include a solution for staff and their storage space so that we can free up that 5,000 square feet so that we can rent it and earn revenue from it.
And a discussion as well, Madam Mayor, about the deferred maintenance and things that I don't know if you want to hear from Lauren on.
I do, please.
We have a line item for maintenance.
So we have a few deferred maintenance items that need to be addressed, such as painting the building. And that's going to be a big ticket item. That's about $75,000 to $80,000. We're currently working on, I think I found the money in this fiscal year to replace all of our awnings. That's about $15,000. Like our city manager said, our playground equipment actually had to be pulled because it would be more expensive to fix it than to just buy a whole new one. We've got some of the crown molding on the building is starting to deteriorate. And then everything that comes along with saltwater environment. So there's some big ticket items on the building itself that need to be addressed. On top of, we do need to put in, I believe that's what the $50,000 increase was. There's some more maintenance that we need to continue to do on the pier.
So is that not reflected in this budget?
No.
Okay. So could you show us what it looked like if it would be reflected? I guess, when are we planning to do this maintenance? We obviously can't defer it indefinitely. So somewhere on this timeline, we're going to do this maintenance, but it's not reflected in there.
Yes, I already have the numbers. I can send them to you.
Okay. I mean, but can we see what it would be like if we?
What was do you know the total?
300,000 is
Tell
what.
them and they'll throw it in.
Okay.
300,000 is what's popping in my head right now from the report.
And does
that I
this
sent you.
reflect the extra expenses on the pier that we had to incur for the spalling?
No, Bruce, you can correct me if I'm wrong. That's going to be an extra $200,000 that is going to have to come out of the current fiscal year that we're in right now.
So
500,000 total.
yeah.
We're at 6.
But that's up there.
No, this is for 20. I believe the $50,000 is for the pier. That's for extra stuff that we have to do. Basically, for the pier project, we've stabilized it, but it's not fully fixed. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
We're still grappling
here.
with this particular budget. And of course, the first obvious thing comes back to, whether or not we make the full payment back. So,
But why isn't it reflected in the?
And I'll defer
The
to
current pier cost?
Bruce.
Well, I would just like to see a projection that includes the things that we know we're going to have to do, and if we know we're going to have to do those things this year and in the following years, we have kind of an incomplete picture of what the fund is going to look like.
Bruce?
You are correct. Number one, I mean, so what we're trying to do is fiscal year 20, if I can step back a little bit and set the table, has really been trying to pull back the different layers of the onion and find out where we're really at. Part of that, or a big part, is the capital expenditures.
You put your microphone up just a little bit.
A little bit better.
Yes, thank you.
So one of the things that we have to do on the capital, and it's an initiative that we've been talking about recently, is putting a comprehensive capital program together with all the needs and try to identify funding sources. And there's several things that we know that are not on that capital list right now. So we are trying to get a better handle on those items, but it's going to take a little bit more time. But if I can say this also, the capital, as you know, there's different ways of doing that. There's a pay-go, which the city has predominantly, especially with the smaller funds and the general fund, is predominantly been all pay-go. In order to do pay-go, you have to have the sufficient fund balances and or revenues to accomplish that. Right now, the fund balance condition throughout most of the funds are a point that we can't do much pay-go in the future. So we have to rebuild those fund balances. So
I'm okay with that, but
Okay.
it appears that we've got some projects and we know how much the projects are going to cost, and we know that the projects are going to have to be done in the next few years, and that they're going to be in this fund, but they're not on the projections for this fund. So I just wanted to see what the projects look like.
So we
in the
have-
projections.
what, $300,000 in
And I put Lauren on the
So-
spot, just to clarify, I put Lauren
we
on the
have-
spot. She's working on honing those numbers and getting the expertise and those things together to give to Bruce. But that's a work in progress right now.
So yeah, so we have $100,000 in 19, and then $75,000 carrying forward 20 through the end of the projection. And so I guess it would give you some room to potentially start working. I don't know if these have been defined. We just have some dual roar number, if you will, to potentially start prioritizing some of the projects I think that they may be referring to.
So to Commissioner Hardy's point, if we put $300,000 in fiscal year 20, you can see the impact to the budget and for fiscal year 20
Sure.
and the out years and see what happens to fund balance.
Yeah. And then is there another 200 for the pier, or is that 200 included in the 300 figure?
That would be inclusive.
Okay, so that's all. So like the awnings, the painting, all that stuff, the playground, all that stuff, 300 grand.
Have we thought
Okay.
of naming? Have we thought of any foundations or corporations that would want to do the playground with a potential naming right?
We are actually in the process of identifying and working on projects like that.
Okay.
She's gonna say this the way it was and then add the 300,000, explain exactly what it is.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool.
Sure. Talk amongst yourselves.
We're also researching grants as well. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, yeah,
We're
'cause
on
it-
the hunt for quite a few.
U.S. conference. They have 2 playground ones. And then we'll talk.
Look into this.
So you agree?
Sorry, Commissioner Robinson?
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see.
I thought we were waiting for something.
Vice
Well-
Mayor? All right, Vice Mayor, go ahead.
Okay, I see this fund as a working fund that continuously moves. When we inherited this fund, the beach fund, the casino fund, whatever you want to call it, we knew it didn't have enough money to do what we needed to do. And we knew that, maintenance was coming up, and we deferred maintenance as long as we can. And I thank you and your staff for, fixing things that need to be fixed today and deferring. But we're now getting up to 10 years, and there's going to be, I'm sure, a lot of things you don't have on your list or that you've pushed off because there's other priorities, for instance, the pier. And when we're talking about the pier, I want to make it perfectly clear that we're talking about the pier that it housed one of our largest tenants. And also the piece that you're referring to is only a piece of our largest tenant's needs. So, we can talk about $200,000 today, but when we're talking about it, we're going to come back and talk about another. And I don't want people to be confused that, we just spent $200,000. $200,000 is for the immediate needs of the pier that houses one of our tenants, but we also have to talk about the actual physical house that houses our tenant, because we are the landlord. And then, I'm not seeing air conditioners. I'm not seeing, we're getting into 10 years. All those other things, especially being sitting on an ocean, go a lot quicker than usual. So, I thank you for all the work that you've done and identify, but I just want to make sure that we know that this fund, I expect this fund to come back quite often, looking for other needs until we find a complete revenue stream. I think I remember last year or the year before, parking revenue was like 1.6. This year I'm looking at 1.4. I don't know what the difference, or is it up from there?
Currently, I'm at 1.7 for beach
Okay.
meters, and I still have 2 months to go.
Okay, good. That's
But
good to hear.
bacteria, sharks, and red tide have not been so helpful.
Correct.
And rain.
Yes.
Yeah. So, so I just wanted to go on record that, this has always been one of our most challenging, that we inherited, with a lot of the work not being done there, and we've stepped in and had to. And you have you have an award-winning ballroom, event space that will need upkeep on a regular basis because your tables, your chairs, all those other things that that we don't really see, but you see, and that makes your day run better, and you have to have those things. So thank you.
Commissioner Robinson?
Well, and I just want to, we are Lake Worth Beach because of that beach facility, and we need to make it one of the jewels of our community. And you're doing everything you can to do that with what you got to work with. But I question the income and expense of managing the second floor ballroom with one operator for the second floor, whether that's truly profitable or not, And weddings are wonderful, divorces sometimes are even better, you know.
Point of order.
So I really like to find out whether we could have an operator do the second floor, maybe the same operator do the food and beverage of the new pool facility. But I'd like to know those answers. I'm also interested in Benny's operation being even more successful, and whether that would be a possibility on the second floor, and not to put a gazillion into the building that he's in now. And he could still operate a profitable bar in a much less magnificent structure than he's got now. Well, you know, one consultant heard from. Those are my comments, but you know, it's terribly disappointing that we were supposed to have an RFQ for an agent to market that, and didn't get any response for some reason. I was told by 3 people that were interested that they had very difficult time finding the application or the paperwork, or even getting a response from the city. I don't know why, but that was certainly disappointing to me, because we do have to market it. And marketing is very important.
We need a headline in the Palm Beach Post that says Lake Worth looking for realtor for the beach project. Hint, hint. It's here.
So,
Sure.
well, and one other comment, just quickly, the awnings, if, you know, that when the awnings start to shred, they're pretty noticeable. Paint, you know, it needs paint, but if awnings are in shreds, that's,
Yeah, that's why we're going to fix them in this fiscal year. That was
Thank
a
you.
big pet peeve of mine.
you're doing a great job.
If Lauren has to go somewhere, do you have to go? Okay. All right. I thought I heard a comment that said Lauren's
Yes.
gotta go. Just, you know, really quickly about Benny's on the beach. I think rather than us spending the money on that structure, we should consider giving the guy a long-term lease. By long-term, I mean greater than 20 years. And so if he gets a lease greater than 20 years, he can finance all those improvements himself. And I think that that's something that we should explore. How many years are left on his lease? Is he past 10 on the because he's allowed a
Options.
20
He
year?
is up again in 2023.
So he's up again. So are we allowed under the charter to renew that past 2023?
He might have some renewals already built in. I'd have to go back and
There are
double
2.
check.
are.
Okay.
There was 1.
So would
I'd have to look.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'd have to
but
go
it's
back
it's
and-
20 total that the
No
person
more than
can get
20.
from
Yeah,
that. Okay.
it's
Does
charter
it have to
limit.
go to a
Yes.
ballot?
Charter.
Right. So
Grant one longer?
my feeling is if we feel like we're going to have to spend a bunch of money on this building, why not let the owner of the business, why not give him the opportunity to spend that money himself by giving him control of the site?
This would have to go to the ballot.
Yeah, I think we should go to the ballot on that. I don't think Benny's is a controversial place. And I think the guy has proven that he knows what he's doing there. And I think that the voters should be given the opportunity to make that decision. It would save us money. It would give him some long-term security. He would be able to invest in that himself. So there's that. They haven't answered my question, but I've got some and we've had these discussions before about parking. So glad that revenue is up year to date from the entire last year's revenue. So demand for parking is not as elastic as we might have feared, which is fantastic. Now the other thing is, and this is something that I've been asking you about, our product. Like if we were a parking factory, right? Like the units would be the number of hours people park at the beach. And so with the systems that we have, are we able to count the number of units that we're selling?
Sorry,
the
I'm
number
just
of
smiling
hours
because I was
parked?
prepared for this.
Yes,
So yes.
we've had this discussion before.
So Larry actually ran a report for me, and this current fiscal year to date, to today,
Mhm.
we are at 685,000 hours of purchase parking.
Okay, where were we last year to date?
I don't know that one,
Okay.
but I can.
That would be the critical thing.
We had a different.
That would be the critical
we had
thing.
a different system.
Okay.
So I can ask Larry, but I don't know if I can get it.
Okay.
But I do have this.
We have a baseline.
So, my guess is, we increased parking rates substantially, and obviously, revenue is up, but it doesn't tell whether people demanded the product less.
Yeah.
We had the red tide last year.
Yeah. How can I say this? If I were in business, I would, and I had a product, I would charge what I could for it that would allow me to make as much revenue as possible without losing any revenue. That's an economic decision. And we know that people from outside of this city use that. So again, going forward, as we have discussions about the pool, as we have discussions about other things there, we've learned something about the demand for parking at the beach, and that people really don't care what they pay up to a certain amount. We haven't reached that yet.
I don't know if I would agree with that statement. I'd say we're right on the cusp of where we should be.
I would like to look at the unit data.
Sure.
I would like to look at the unit data to determine exactly what is there. But I think we should get the most of what we can get and not leave anything on the table, is my belief.
Are we?
Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And they've got the answer to my question.
Are we closer to getting an idea as to who are the users?
Yes. A while back, I emailed you guys a breakdown of our Park Mobile app. It's a small snapshot of those, but it broke it down by state. So you can see all of the different cities. West Palm's a heavy hitter. Boca's a heavy hitter for us. And it also breaks it down by state. We're very popular with Atlanta, which I thought that was really interesting from a marketing perspective. I can resend that if you'd like.
I never saw that.
It's got a total breakdown on it.
And is that everything to date to our new system?
Yes.
Okay, and what I'm really looking for, the number is, what is the percentage of users that are from Lake Worth Beach?
I can't give you a whole snapshot. I could only pull what's in Park Mobile. And I can pull that percentage for you. I don't know it off the top of my head.
And if you add in local, maybe.
What I heard is we're Boca's preferred beach.
We also get a from 3, 3, 4, 6, 7. I saw a lot of unincorporated for the Lake Worth breakdown.
Okay.
Wellington didn't figure in?
There's a little bit of Wellington
There's
in there.
6, 7, yeah.
That's 'cause they all have their pied a terre here anyhow. So.
Whether those communities that used to be like to call Wellington, and now they're calling themselves Lake Worth.
Yeah, I think that. West Lake Worth.
Palm Beach Gardens, Wellington, Delray, Boca, Loxahatchee, Jupiter, and Deerfield. We're all listed for Palm Beach County.
It's interesting.
I just wanted to mention Ed's still here. Did he leave anyhow? He was talking about putting there he is, charging stations over there, and that's an exciting concept that is to the future and is also as long as it's income producing.
It's exciting for me. I don't think it's as exciting for the beach fund, who would rather have those parking spots for other things.
Well, losing 16 spaces for grand staircase would be expensive.
I think we talked about maybe two spaces, so a single charger that could serve two vehicles was what we had talked about. If we do move forward with it,
Don't make it in the resident lot, please. What about our? Well, who's got a?
It's Amber Alert.
It's an Amber Alert.
Those are the things that are part of our selling point of us as a
Correct.
successful city.
When we looked at where we might put these public charging stations where people could actually charge their vehicles, we thought about places where they might enjoy spending an hour or two. The beach was one of those places, some other places downtown, but we're still looking at the economics. At the moment, the cost to lease the charging stations with the payment mechanism is probably more than we would recover from the electric sales. But the assumption is that it brings more people to that location that might otherwise come, and it gives them something to do while they're there.
There was also, at the conference too this past year, they had a number of, like, over there where you go to pay the meter, or, you know, you go to input your information, they have those, solar umbrellas that they have over it so that you have shade while you're standing there. They also have where you can charge your cell phones in there too for people and hang out in the shade areas. And a lot of the companies were looking for, cities to try out some of those things. Another place to look.
It is our plan to do that. That is more of an aesthetic and messaging tool than it is actually a power generation. It will obviously generate power, but it's not a very profitable way to do it. But it does send the message about what we are, who we are, and that we encourage it. So
Especially if we could have grants or
Yeah.
be the, you know, the,
Like our new bus stop.
exactly. That's exactly
With
what I was just
solar
thinking.
panels.
Vice Mayor?
I brought some of that information back and gave it to maybe the wrong person. I probably should have given it to Lauren. But Lauren, look for that information. It is, and they're out of Parkland, so they're closed. But it was a station that could have charging. We had the ability to charge whatever we wanted. It had other things on there, informational pieces, charging stations, lighting, other pieces you could add. Of course, there was a cost according to what you added, but you could start low with just the charging and add other things. But I did pass that on. So.
plus they look really cool too.
They are very
You
cool.
are very cool. All right. Well, thanks, folks. Appreciate it. Mike, your light is on.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. But nobody's home.
That's right. You've got it up there now? Okay.
Yeah, so the green bars is what we were looking at before with that reduction of about $55,000 of keeping it off. And then the blue bars is if you kept the $55,000 in there throughout the projection and included a one-time $300,000 expenditure for, as an example of what we were talking about. And so the blue bars will show you the working capital balances coming down to the point where in 2025, they're no longer there.
300,000 is in
The
2020.
one time. Yep.
Right.
And I looked it up just to give everybody a perspective. So 300,000 is about 7.5% of your total revenue. So it's just a big number
Sure.
from this fund stance.
You'll be okay for a couple of years, and then see how things work out. And that, but at sooner or later, you'd have to deal with that fund balance issues one way or the other. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Thanks, guys. Still have refuse?
Refuge.
So refuse is another one that really did not change. When we talked to you about this one, we were basically showing you that the cash out is higher than your cash in, and you have enough working capital balances to use down to that black line target. However, from a combined bond issuance stance, we thought it would be wise to reflect that 1.25 annual rate increases. This is good because it'll start bridging the gap between your cash in and a cash out, so that at the point where you get to 28, 29, it's still kind of large, but when we showed it to you before, and we can show it to you again without any of the rate increases, you have a really large deficit, and then you're going to have to come up with a really high rate increase at one point, which at that point we were looking at about 25% in fiscal year 2028. Again, it's so far out of the projection, but in order to creep up to it, if you will, we were showing you the 1.25 every year, so that you're kind of moving down the working capital balances a little slower.
Which you then could adjust. I mean, as you get further out, you adjust to compensate based on what your revenues come in.
Exactly, because it's so far out. You get to that target in 2029, so you're talking 10 years from now.
Right. Commissioner Hardy?
So this is one of the funds that uses the fleet garage.
Right.
Okay. So as I stated, I'm kind of philosophically opposed to using penny sales tax funds for stuff that benefits funds where there are ratepayers and debt capacity, right? And so my question is, to what extent are you able to, with some changes to what we see here, potentially finance a new structure with money from this fund?
For the record, Jamie Brown, Public Works Director.
Because that's and again going back to Monday's conversation.
This is one of the funds that actually contributes to the general fund.
Mm-hmm.
I have to bring Bruce up because I'm not sure what the current amount is that we're contributing out of this fund.
When you say contributing, you mean you talking about like paying for administrative costs, or is there just like a sort of
It's
a
just
dividend?
it's a contribution to the general.
Okay. Okay. So what's the contribution?
Fund. I'm not sure what that current amount is.
Okay.
Yeah, go to your transfers.
Let's see if it's in there. Percentages.
So the annual contribution in 2020 is 601,797.
Is that standard practice?
So a contribution to the general fund is, it exists throughout the state and at different levels. And it really is, I think, a requirement from.
It really is to, I don't know whether this does that. I don't know who calculated what this number should be, but typically it's a transfer to the general fund for services received by the enterprise fund from the general fund.
Like accountants stuff.
Accounting,
And-
payroll,
right.
purchasing, that type of thing.
But that's not what this is, seemingly.
Well, I don't know what that is. It's a transfer to the general fund. I don't know what the basis of it is.
It is. So what is the basis of the $600,000 transfer?
Again, I have to
Okay, Letitia
refer to
just
finance.
cleared that up. You have an administrative services transfer.
Right.
Outside of this, this is a transfer in addition to that.
Okay.
So it would be kind of like a payment in lieu of taxes or franchise fees, or kind of like the electric fund transfer.
Yes, Madam Mayor, that's basically the profit that, as a business, you receive over to the general fund, just like with
General
electric.
Fund has that.
Correct, and that's propping up your general fund.
So are you saying that what the refuse department needs is a new building to service its fleet, but that, and potentially you could, like, if basically you weren't giving us 600 grand a year over and above the amount that the general fund
Indirect
provides in
costs,
services
yeah.
to you, that maybe you might be able to finance that? Okay.
Yeah,
So-
and keep in mind, it's not just the solid waste vehicles that it services. It also does all the vehicles that fall in the general fund as well
Okay.
for the
Ma-
fleet facility.
Sure.
Madam Mayor, can I
So-
put that in a difference for, I don't mean to cut you off, Commissioner. If this was a privatized sanitation function, say Waste Management was doing it, you would be receiving a payment from them for the ability to supply the services in this city. So it's not an unknown practice.
fine.
Yeah,
But
okay,
what
so
would
you're
the
cool with that.
payment- I mean, for example, with the electric fund, the payment that the electric fund is paying the city far exceeds what
It's about twice what we get from a franchise
precisely.
fee.
And so,
That's why we're trying to wean ourselves off.
right. But so I think we need to do that here too, because clearly we have some needs here that the refuse fund should be able to finance on its own between its ratepayers and its debt capacity, that it's not able to finance because we're living off of its profitability. in part.
Madam Mayor, to your point, Commissioner, probably this fund of all the funds is the one that probably could pay its share into a financed mechanism to build the facility. This one probably has the capability to, even with that transfer.
So why don't we do that rather than?
It's one of the
take it
options
out of
we're
it?
looking at as a mix of funding mechanisms along with, and as we discussed, potentially some sales tax.
So what would that look like if the refuse fund financed this on its own?
That's something that we're working with the financial advisor on.
What's the total amount for the building?
4.9.
3.9.
It was 3.9.
It was 3.9.
No.
Could we see what 3.9 would
Yeah,
look like?
If I could point to the CIP spending real quickly,
Right.
there is an assumption of a dual roar amount of $500,000 of cash funded capital every year.
Are those
included
projects
in here.
identified?
I don't know yet.
Th-
Not
Those are
ideal.
vehicles.
Vehicles.
Those are
Trucks.
vehicle
Vehicle
replacements.
replacement program.
We can add that number in and let it get debt funded. Let's just do that.
Yep, okay.
Let's do that. What year do you want to put it in?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll put a new capital project in 41.
Of $3.9 million, and it'll be all
For the
debt
fleet
funded.
facility. That's an immediate need. It's not
Okay,
21.
so let's say 2020, and it'll all be debt funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He says it's an immediate need.
3.9.
Because that falls into the general funded vehicles
Yeah.
as well, even though they're allocated across all the.
3.9
Yeah,
million.
you can't fund it out of one fund, I don't think. That wouldn't be appropriate. Oh, here comes Bruce.
Straighten us out.
Jamie just got really nervous. Hey, what's pay for it?
So if you would debt borrow or fund this through a borrowing, the all the different funds would have to pay into it. It wouldn't be just
On a
the
pro rata basis.
on a pro rata basis.
So I was told that the only funds were the general fund and the refuse fund.
There's a general, all enterprise funds,
All the enterprise funds used it.
because anybody with a vehicle,
So water,
everybody.
okay.
Everybody.
So, and I mean okay. So on a
Vehicle.
on a vehicle, so we could potentially spread this around some
Yes,
to the water fund, sewer fund, local sewer fund.
local sewer.
Okay. I asked about the stormwater fund. They said no, because there are really only two people who were.
It would be a function of vehicles, and if I remember correctly, they have 2 vehicles.
They have 2 vehicles. Okay, so potentially all of these funds, electric, beach. Well, I mean, there are beach. There are.
There are
They're
vehicles.
vehicles.
Okay, so every single fund, we could spread this across every single fund, not just concentrate it here.
That's correct.
Okay, so again, we had this conversation about the dire need to do this now. That's fine. I care about how we finance it. I don't want to use penny sales tax dollars. If there are funds like the water, local sewer, stormwater, refuse, even electric, I understand you have your own capital improvement needs, but just as a, for sake of argument, we should be paying this from funds where there are ratepayers and debt capacity rather than.
Well, concept-wise, I think, it makes sense, and that's one of the reasons why we're evaluating that piece. But again, I come back to all these funds are very tight on their fund balances.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
When you look
This
at.
will be all debt funded.
Okay, but when we, just, to make sure, because I don't think we've really talked about, when we talk about working capital, that's one definition. Okay, and up here you see working capital. What we need to take a look at when we talk about appropriations is unrestricted fund balances. And unrestricted fund balances and working capital are 2 separate, distinct amounts. Okay, excuse me. So concept-wise, very definitely, and again, that's one of the options that we have to really take a look at. But if we do that debt service and spread it like you recommend, we're probably going to have an additional burden on these, on all the enterprise funds. And we'll probably have to take an incremental rate increase to absorb that.
That's fine, but we're looking at 1
I'm just pointing out maybe
Sure.
the obvious, but
Sure.
I just want to point it out.
Well, the concern was that already we're in discussions in reference to, our bond ratings. You mentioned that instead of going individually, that we will be organizationally applying, right?
Correct.
When you
It'll be
mentioned earlier.
a,
So it's not like just one,
The enterprise funds.
it'll be
the
a,
enterprise funds.
it'll be a combined utility.
Sure. But
If I may add something here too, you have enough reserve balance in this fund to pay for that project with cash, okay?
can you say that one more time for me, please?
You have enough reserve fund balance, working capital balance, to pay for that project in cash, and then you could have the other funds pay back, or in essence, you could finance the payback with the other funds possibly. Bruce, you don't like that?
No.
You don't like that?
I do not like that. And the reason being is, and it's a conversation I've had with our financial advisors, is we want to slow down as much as we possibly can additional expenditures out of fund balance. We have to, you'll hear me say this lots of times. We want to build our fund balance as much as we possibly can.
I can understand that. Now, he presented one way, basically you pay for this out of cash. Another way is to simply borrow the money
No,
rather than paying for it out of cash. Pay for it
again,
pay for the debt service over a period of time and spread it out.
no, the fundamental that I'm trying to lay on the table is we have to build up reserves.
Sure.
Okay, once you pay something, pay go. Okay, $4 million. You're taking that $4 million out of your fund balance across all funds.
Not if you borrow it. If you borrow $4 million, what are you paying at that point? Debt service.
Okay, if we borrow, yes.
Yeah.
But then again, so that if you borrow, then you're putting pressure on the rate. It's a dance that we have to work through.
But that's with any project. If you borrow money, you soak up debt capacity. You have to compensate for that some kind of way. And in this particular fund, rate increases are slated to be very reasonable. Very reasonable.
Commissioner Hardy, if I may, this actually shows the borrowing scenario. See the blue bar over in the bottom right-hand graph?
Yes.
That's the borrowing of that money.
Uh-huh.
And what happened in the reserve fund balances up there, the working capital balances in the upper left, they started dropping off because now you have that debt service that's eating them up.
Right.
What we don't have in here is the contribution that would come from the other funds for their fair share of that debt service for the vehicles that,
Right.
that are using it.
And so
And what we also don't have is the impact that would have on the
on
other
those
funds.
funds.
Those funds.
Right. That's fine. But we also, what we don't have is the compensating move we would make to rates in the refuse funds, which are slated to increase very reasonably. Again, we're talking about 1.25%. We're not talking 15% as we were in, what was that? Sewer. Right. So, I mean, if we were to increase rates by instead of 1.25%, if we were to go, 3.5%, what does that do? And is that an unreasonable thing to do, given where we are to our peers on refuse rates?
Amy?
Well, the issue there she just brought up is that if you don't bring any payments in from the other funds, and this fund would be supporting the other funds, that would be a decision you could make, but that would be a
It's like owning a house.
Do you want to see what that would be if we put a higher rate increase in there, Commissioner?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, do you have also the comparative rates in the county?
That's what she's looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Have you ever bought a house or a car?
No.
Okay. So when you buy a house or a car, you have like a loan to debt ratio?
Sure.
So.
But, what we were just told here is that they have plenty of debt capacity.
In that one fund.
In that one fund.
And precisely, but what I'm saying is that this fund, even though other funds use this particular building, this fund could pay for a redo of that building between debt capacity and a rate increase that no one would find unreasonable. So why would we take money from the penny sales tax fund, from the penny sales tax to pay for this when this fund has the ability to pay for itself? There's some version of us being able to pay for this without using penny sales tax money that would be reasonable.
You're seeing the survey up there now, and you're right about it in the middle.
Exactly.
And
by the way, we're in the middle of last year's numbers for everybody else, right? Or is this updated?
It's 2019, and we don't know what the other people are going to do going forward.
And they're probably going in one direction.
They're going down.
Right. Okay.
Everybody
So
has the same pressures on them.
Okay. So again, why are we taking money from the penny sales tax fund to do this when this fund could do it on its own, or it could do it between this fund and other funds working together to do it?
Madam Mayor, I think you're looking at this fund and seeing one piece of a picture. The impact of the pro rata payment on the electric fund, for example.
What is the pro rata payment?
I honestly don't know. But
how can
whatever
we
it
speak to the
is, we're
impact?
struggling. I think what Bruce was saying. We're struggling to make these funds work and work well, and to have the balances so that we can borrow the money. It's another answer. The question would come back to you: raise the rates, which I don't know what to do, or cut contributions into the general fund so that he can take and propel the electric fund in the right direction.
Mr. Burton, is it possible that this fund, the refuse fund, could pay for this $3.9 million project on its own?
We'll go back to the fund and let's look. It could, and only in the out years do you have a problem.
Right.
But at some point, let's just put 3% rate increases like you suggested, starting in 2021, or you could start,
or you know what, even
start
further
them later.
back, like 2023, 2024.
Start them. Okay, let's do that. and we'll go back and see what happens to those fund balances.
Lo and behold.
So, yeah, so
Lo and behold.
it could work
So-
with that kind of a plan.
So we should, why aren't we trying to do this rather than take money from the penny sales tax? Like this makes it work.
And we don't have penny sales money coming into this fund.
Precisely.
Okay.
But we were presented something on Monday where they have a capital project and they wanted some money from the penny sales tax fund. Well, this fund could pay for it on its own.
I don't know that's.
The cookie jar is so tempting.
Yes.
Yeah, it
and the penny
is.
sales tax fund is the cookie jar.
Would you use the electric utility to pay for a facility that would subsidize the garbage fund? Would be the inverse of that argument. I don't think you would.
Okay, so how about this? What is the pro rata usage of this facility to the other funds? If we're going to have this conversation about how important it is for each fund to pay its share, then we should be able to know what the pro rata share is.
Well, number one,
It's different.
What is it?
okay.
Is the
Number one, we're finding out what the unrestricted fund balance of this particular fund is. Because again, the working capital and fund balance, available fund balance are two different numbers. The second thing, again, piggybacking on Mike's comment, and what I'm trying to emphasize is for the rating agencies to look at our ability to pay back debt, the first step is that we had to combine all the different funds together because there are strong ones and there are weak ones. And
this is a strong one.
this is a strong.
Okay.
Electric on its own, it would be more challenging, okay? So we combine the strong with the not so strong.
So you're saying that by taking this fund's debt capacity up, you're also taking debt capacity from the electric fund.
And other fund. And all
And
the
other funds.
Okay. Now, my question is, okay, again, why are we asking sales taxpayers, okay, to fund this capital project when this capital project could be funded by the ratepayers that benefit from it?
Okay, well,
Like,
first of all,
typically, utilities have their ratepayers and their bondholders pay for upgrades to their assets, and eventually the ratepayer always pays. So, what, like,
well, you're making great questions. One of the problems is, and just let me fall back, the fund balance for the refuse, unrestricted fund balance, is $3.4 million. Okay, so again, different numbers that we have to be mindful of.
why don't we see? I guess if that's a relevant number, why aren't we seeing it in this decision-making tool?
Because they are, the tool that they are providing is working capital. And working capital, you have to pull out debt restrictions and everything else and other restrictions for, and that's a great segue into what my next thought is. And we're talking about an operating budget and we're talking about capital budgets, okay? My recommendation is that we postpone for a little bit the capital conversation because we are putting together a capital program that will have these numbers and the information that you're looking for to make these kind of conversations and make the decisions that you want to make. Right now, this is the operating. All we're trying to present right now is the operating budget, and put and our goal is to have sufficient liquidity or revenues, net revenues, to fund future capital. So that and not to use fund balance on an ongoing basis.
And Madam Mayor, just more pointedly to the specific question that the sales tax money versus ratepayer paying for, if you look at what the sales tax categories allow the funds to be used for, you could you could have that as your threshold for all things, whether it's roads or So I don't know. It's
But we don't toll our roads, right? It's like there's no rate payers
well
for roads. There's no debt
we
capacity.
actually put a $40 million bond issue on on property tax.
Sure,
to
and
fix
that's a
the
general
roads.
obligation bond. That's not when you turn right on A Street.
But the citizens
charging you
in
for
the
the
city
use
are
of A
paying
Street.
for it.
Right, okay.
So I
That's different.
you can
from a
kind of
rate
get around
change.
those arguments, or people using the beach and the parking. You can come up with revenue streams there for every kind of thing that's allowed in the sales tax. But the one thing I don't want to miss, however we end up, and y'all say you want to do this, the immediacy of the need was really what was driving a lot of this conversation to get this issue resolved, and I don't want to lose that and let this conversation go on into the future real far. We do need to make some decisions on his building, whatever it is.
Understand, but can we work on the operating budget at this point and get into that discussion a little bit deeper?
But the whole evening we've been talking about capital spending as well, and we've
Well, we
been
can
talking
simply
about the
fix
way
it
that
all.
capital spending affects the operating budget. And this is, as Jamie said, an immediate need. So when's the next time Mr. Burton and
I'm gonna
Letitia
say,
are going to be here so that we can have this conversation?
can I talk? Because I really rarely talk this whole evening. I know you had the floor most of it. We've said it over and over again. The important thing about it is that the enterprise funds, there are many, and what staff has said repeatedly this evening is that our bond rating is essential at this point because of the projects that have to happen. We have to go across and use the leverage of all the funds, all the enterprise funds in reference to that. Is that not correct? Okay. So because we have to leverage that to keep our bond rating up so we can borrow for some of the capital improvement projects that we have to utilize the union of all those said enterprise funds, not just one. And this project, the reason why he may have been asking and suggesting, because we're not talking about penny sales tax here tonight, but because you
they're
brought,
obviously connected.
but it's my floor, right? So the reason why he's asking for it is because it's a one-time expenditure where the money gets spent for the penny sales tax. And that's something you can vote down or whatever you want to do. I don't care. But what we're saying is that we have to now make these decisions and create a balanced budget so that we can increase and stay strong in our bottom ratings as we have in the past and set aside our capital funds project, our capital projects, and get them funded with the greatest impact. Correct? Okay. Commissioner Robinson?
I had a question, just, at what point, is it, the bond financing is expensive? Is that, I'd like to, tell me.
Bond ratings or credit rating?
With the bond borrowing is an expensive way to borrow. At what point is it 1 million, 500,000, 3 million? The difference between going to the bank and can we go to the bank and borrow money? Or do we have to bond everything? Which is it, and tell me the difference of the expense of bonding versus borrowing.
Typically, you're correct. The underwriting expenses for a market bond is a little bit heavier. There are similar expenditures when you go to a private bank deal. It's not for free, if you will. But one of the things that we have to do, and we went to Bank of America, quite honestly, who has our current debt, and tried to restructure and pull in what we're talking about. And it was outside of their ability to provide us that credit. And we talked to other banks of pretty sizable position, and they too were not able to commit on such a issuance. So in order for us to do what we want to do in the magnitude of the dollars that we're talking about, we have to do a public offering.
Okay.
That's what we're locked into.
So what was the, Bank of America couldn't afford to lend us the money?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
How much, what were we talking?
They said that they would not.
What did you ask for then?
We gave them 3 different tranches of what the capital needs were. We added up all the different all the different utility bonds and structured it in such a way with the flows that we're talking about right now.
And Madam Mayor, we have our financial advisors. I'd be happy to sit down in more detail with Commissioner Robinson and Commissioner Hardy and give them more details on what the financial advisors.
I think that would be very
Yeah.
helpful.
That's helpful.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
So, I'm just struggling to understand again, like if we didn't have the penny sales tax money right now, right? If we had committed it all, what you're telling me is that we would absolutely not be able to finance this the way these funds would typically finance their CapEx.
The city historically has done everything on a pay-go model, or by large extent, pay-go.
OPM.
There's a lot of deferred maintenance and a lot of required capital that we need to go out. And we need to prioritize those items and look at the available revenue streams, because we're not going to be able to do it all.
Jamie says this is a priority. He says this is an immediate need. Like,
And
it
that-
can't go on any further.
And that's the priorities that we had to take a look at.
Right.
And look at the available.
So as far as stuff that we would bond out, why isn't this as high up on the list as anything else? If it's an immediate need right now, it's a sale in a hurricane is basically, you know, what I've been told. Why isn't this high on the priority list of projects that we would bond out for?
Again, you know, that's we're right at the beginning of doing the evaluations.
Let me see if I can answer this. This building had black mold problems originally.
It's a big deal.
We had other issues. I authorized Jamie to move forward with a specific study to document the severity of the issues, to quantify it, because for the first time in the city's history, there was actually some funds available potentially from the sales tax. We have struggled and not done for years before we got here and in the leading years up to now, because we just didn't have the money. So we prioritized and did what we could.
But you have the money to pay for it right now from this fund.
I don't think
that shows it
that
right there.
Funding it completely from the sanitation without the other funds paying into it is
That's
an
fine.
appropriate financial, and that would be my advice not to do it that way. I think you should do it a pro rata share. In order to do that, Commissioner, you have to jack the expenses in the other funds, which we're struggling mightily.
Those
Even
funds also have rates.
We're struggling mightily to figure out how to balance the general fund budget and everything else so that we can relieve the pressure and sacrifice to make these utilities whole. Just it's going the other direction, and so I'm getting cross signals here. Now, if the entirety of the commission wants to move in that direction, my resulting advice would be to continue to try to make those funds healthy, which would mean I would further cut into the general fund and the things that you have control over to keep those fund balances and rates within reason so we can borrow the money to do the
I just think we
it's
should
all
have been
interrelated.
presented with this as an option from the get-go, rather than presenting it to us like the only way we have to do it is from the penny sales fund, right? Like there are alternatives to doing it the way it was presented to us on Monday. We didn't get these alternatives, right? And so again, I would like us to have all the information from the jump. I understand you would like for certain things to be financed a certain way, but if there are options, we should be presented with options rather than preferences. I feel that that's what we should be presented with. I'm done objecting to this.
In the entirety of this organization, including the department directors and the people responsible in those various enterprise funds, that didn't look like an option that had validity given the cuts that we're making. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. I'm looking at some stuff on a screen that tells me that it's an option.
You're looking at one fund.
That's fine. But again, I'm done objecting to this.
Commissioner Robinson?
Well, we haven't decided, we haven't made any decision. I appreciate the question. We
don't appreciate questions.
Point of order, excuse me.
No,
disrespect on the dais, please.
I appreciate your question in how we're going to fund the building. And if raising the rate by a little. This is how we financed the beach, right? We borrowed from other funds.
Precisely.
And we're still, yeah, that's how, when you borrow, you have to pay it back. That's the problem, you know. So, we don't have the money, so we're gonna have to borrow it from somewhere. I'd like to borrow it as cheaply as possible. And if that's an option, I'd certainly like to consider it.
Do less roads.
Forget total decorum.
But we haven't talked about the general fund in how all this stuff is going to affect the general operation of, you know, the little things that add up to the general fund, not to the enterprise zones. That's what I'm concerned about. Anyhow, let's decide on this shed sooner rather than later, however we're gonna do it. I'm sorry.
I think staff has made it abundantly clear the reasonings for their suggestions and recommendation in reference to that. And it's been stated over and over again. So I think that we would be best to have those conversations that the city manager would like to have. And
I just wanted to point out real quick, I mean, that coming all from this particular fund, I mean, keep in mind, I still have to run the operation itself.
no.
Yes. So there's that as well. So there's a kind of a, you know, as the city manager and Bruce had mentioned before, there's kind of a fiscally responsible way to go about doing it. But to pull it all from this fund, that's going to make it very difficult. You know, we have a vehicle replacement schedule. There are a lot of factors that go into running this particular operation. So I wouldn't want to handicap how that actually runs by trying to go about doing that, if possible.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, one of the best things that this city has done for itself over the last several years in terms of its budgeting and looking into the future on how we're going to navigate the financial waters was bringing in this organization and the Stantec model to show us how all of the funds interact with each other, if that is in fact the case, and how doing X to one fund, in some cases, not all, but in many cases, has a Y impact on other funds. And what we're talking about here tonight with discussion over the internal borrowing or whatever financing of this is having an impact across all funds, which puts a greater strain on finances department's ability to bond out. I think that's been said 3 or 4 times in 6 or 7 different languages. And if it's any help at all, I think I want to remind everybody, for what it's worth, I'm not a big proponent of raising taxes or raising rates. And I hope that we'll all keep in mind very clearly that the sales tax money is a tax imposed on the people. So they've already been taxed once. And for us not to, when necessary, follow the competent staff of our professional, or the competent advice of our professional staff, and suggest that on top of the tax for sales tax, we're going to increase taxes over here again for something that we clearly maybe could look at from a different perspective, is I don't think we're being the best stewards of the taxpayers' money.
Commissioner Robinson?
Does this have to be a separate item? Can it be an agenda item and not a budget item? And so that we can, this is a workshop, we're not going to vote on it, but can we vote on it? Because it's falling down. So, and we can talk about the budget forever, but not come to this vote on the building alone.
Yes, Madam Mayor, yes, sir. The building is on a separate track in our minds from staff's perspective. The first time that the data that we had assembled was presented to you as part of the sales tax discussion along with the tie line to find out what y'all felt, because there's been some conversations about that. So that was our first step. It needs to evolve and go forward. We now have a sense of how y'all feel about it from the sales tax perspective. So we would be bringing it forward.
So it's going to be in the next budget, the next agenda?
No, I don't believe it'll be on the next agenda, but I'll get back to you when I talk to Jamie on that.
Okay. All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? I didn't hear votes.
I didn't oppose.
Yeah,
Vote.
you know,
I didn't oppose. Aye.
good. It's,
I didn't oppose.